Well, hello, it's John back again. And as you know, we've done the introduction to creating healing gardens to set the scene. And I'm now moving on to look at ideas and inspirations to help you create your own healing gardens wherever you may be. Now, the idea is that you can dip into this process of ideas and inspirations whenever or however you like. You don't have to take them in a particular order. But I'm doing them in a kind of order myself, which might interest you. And this is indeed number one. Now, where do you think I've started? Do you think it's going to be with plants or designs with a piece of paper or looking at the soil or measuring things or working out what the scheme's going to be? Well, no, strangely enough, I've started with poetry. And in this case, one of my favourite poets of nature, Edward Thomas, although there are many other poets that I love. And of course, for you, it may be a different poet that you love, maybe from a different country which has other poets, and English may not be your first language, so your poetry may not be in English at all. So this is hopefully going to help you find your own poetry and places and ideas that you love. Now, why begin with poetry? Well, for me, creating healing gardens is above all a spiritual endeavor. What you're seeking to do is to connect to those powerful healing aspects and frequencies and life of nature and enhance it in the place where you are and where you live to bring stronger connections to that healing essence in your gardens. Now, when we walk out into our gardens, of course, we're walking out into an extraordinary, living, breathing being. Because, of course, not only are the trees and plants alive, but there's a myriad of tiny little insects and animals all over the place. Not just the bigger ones we can see or the birds in the air, but tiny things we can't see. And it's them that keep the whole of the ecology going. As they say, worms are the angels of the earth. And not only is the living beings that we see around us and experience in the trees and plants, but of course in the sky we have the sun and the moon, and at night the stars and the Milky Way. So we're walking out into the universe, we're walking out into creation when we walk out into our gardens. And what I'm seeking to do is bring that whole sense of spirituality and connection into play straight away as the first thing I do before I think of doing anything with my garden at all. To put myself in that place, in myself, in my mind, in my spirit, in my feelings, to start the process there. Now, for me, poetry is like an open door. Love poetry can connect us to nature, to our gardens, to spirituality in all kinds of special ways. That's the gift that some poets have. And so as we then walk through our garden or sit where we are near our beloved plants, then we can connect to the life of them, the spiritual life of creation, and the healing processes that we can then link to. Now, to me, Edward Thomas was just such a marvellous poet of nature. And so here what I've done is I've taken photographs from Qum and I've connected them to his poems. Now, of course, because of this, what I've done is I've created a circumstance in which if I'm going to certain parts of my garden, then that will bring to mind that poem, that connection, that particular spiritual feeling. And also you'll find that in all the other inspirational ideas I've put together here, then at the end of each one there'll be a poem and a picture in the same way to end with a spiritual connection to some part of what we're all trying to do in creating healing gardens. Okay, well, I hope that's an introduction there. And now we'll move on to have a look at the pictures of Cwm and the poems or the parts of poems from Edward Thomas that I've chosen. We'll hear a connection to the majesty of the trees and the strength and power that they have. The beeches keep a stormy rest, breathing deep of wind from the west. The wood is black with a misty steam. Above, the cloud pack breaks for one gleam. Edward Thomas, of course, writing in 1915, was well aware that gardens are an important part of memory. Memory for the lives of others who gave so much that we may enjoy the quiet beauty of the gardens today. The flowers left thick at nightfall in the wood this Eastertide call into mind the men now far from home who, with their sweethearts, should have gathered them and will do never again. I don't know that I've ever heard of a garden designer giving the air and the sky and the views of the clouds a critical part in their garden design. But of course, in healing gardens, when we have to consider the four elements, the elements of air and the sky and the clouds are a critical part of the healing process that can go on within a garden. So here's a poem from Edward Thomas on this. As the clouds that are so light, beautiful, swift, and bright, cast shadows on field and park of the earth that is so dark. And now, of course, on to the element of fire, or the sun, or the energy of light. And here again, it is so critical that this is brought into the sensing and feeling and design of a healing garden. There's nothing like the sun as the year dies. Kind as it can be, this world being made so, to stones and men and beasts and birds and flies, to all things that it touches, except snow, whether on mountainside or street of town. Now, here again, as we experience the delicate beauty of flowers in the spring, it's important to remember that for many people in this world, the spring will not be like that for them, whether refugees or living in refugee camps or in countries that are at civil war. Their lives are going to be very different to the privileged ones that we have to be able to sit up and look at blossoms like this. The cherry trees bend over and are shedding on the old road where all that past are dead, their petals, strewing the grass as for a wedding this early May morn, when there is none to wed. And here again we're considering that beautiful, wonderful element of water that Edward Thomas reflected on many occasions. Bright clouds of May shade half the pond. Beyond, all but one bay of emerald tall reeds, like criss-cross bayonets where a bird once called lies bright as the sun. And here is a picture and a poem that reflects on the nature of earth in the woods of winter. Running along a bank, a parapet that saves from the precipitous wood below the level road, there is a path. It serves children for looking down the long, smooth steep between the legs of beech and yew to where a fallen tree checks the sight. And of course gardens bring to us that healing transformation of spring, summer, autumn and winter, as we've seen in other pictures here, of course. And here's a poem that brings together the magic of two seasons at once. It was upon a July evening, at a stile I stood, looking along a path, over the country, by a second spring, drenched perfect green again. And gardens, and particularly flowers, can have an extraordinary healing effect in uplifting spirits, in raising depression, and in helping trauma. And here's a poem that speaks of this. Thinking of her had saddened me at first, until I saw the sun on the celandines lie redoubled, and she stood up like a flame. And finally, well, of course, our life is an extraordinary journey, isn't it? And the healing nature of gardens can take us too on a mystical and magical journey into creation to who knows where. Early one morning in May I set out, and nobody I knew was about. I'm bound away for ever, away somewhere, away forever. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll be continuing with further ideas and inspirations as we go on. Bye now.